The wind screamed through the thick forest, bearing the pungent smell of smoke and damp soil. The night was brutally cold. A blazing fire illuminated the darkness, projecting ghostly shapes far off. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the wind's roar. She had no clue how she ended up there, no clue what was unfolding. The coarse ropes binding her wrists bit into her flesh, sending jolts of pain through her arms with every desperate struggle. The atmosphere was dense, choked with dread and confusion. Above the night sky was a canopy of stars, but they provided no solace. Only the steady thud of hooves broke the silence, growing louder, more menacing, like a herd charging straight at her. Her breath hitched, but she dared not utter a sound. The warning had been clear. If she made a noise, it would be her last. Keep quiet, or they'll hear you. The voice was gruff, harsh, almost like the wind itself. It came from behind her, but she couldn't turn to see. Her captors had been swift, silent. Now they were leading her deeper into the wilderness, away from everything familiar, away from the safety of her world. She sensed the tension in the air, the crackle of an uncertain future looming over her, and wondered what awaited her. The sound of hooves grew louder, and with each beat, the darkness seemed to thicken. The ground beneath her was cold and unyielding. The air was filled with the scent of wet leaves and burning timber. Abruptly, the hooves halted. The silence was oppressive. She could feel their presence, lurking, watching. Then a voice shattered the quiet. It belonged to a man, a leader, authoritative and commanding. "Bring her to me." Her heart leaped. She knew what that meant. The conflict was about to begin. If she didn't obey, her people would be at the mercy of the Comanche. A union, a bond born of desperation, was her only hope to avert the chaos about to unfold. But as she was forced to stand and dragged forward, her mind raced. How had it come to this? How had she become a piece in a game she didn't comprehend? And the most pressing question of all, would she ever find a way to escape this ordeal? Or would she be trapped forever, caught between love, duty, and a future she couldn't steer? The sun descended over the harsh, unforgiving desert, stretching long shadows across the desolate landscape. It was a place where the wind never ceased its howl, sweeping sand across the earth and carrying with it echoes of long-forgotten tales. The sun, a blinding orb of fire, sank lower on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of red and orange that seemed to merge into one another. In the distance, rugged mountain peaks stood like silent guardians, watching over the edge of civilization. Elowen stood at the cliff's edge, her figure stark against the fading light. 502 Bad Gateway, unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflare to Elowen, was set to wed Durnhelia, intertwining her destiny with his people and stepping into the heart of the turmoil. As she gazed out from the cliff's edge, her eyes squinting against the gusting wind, she sensed the world's gaze upon her. The inhabitants of Fort Laramie held varied views on the impending union. Some viewed it as a noble act of selflessness, while others saw it as a treacherous act of deceit. For Elowen, it was a living nightmare, a political gambit that threatened to strip her of everything she had fought to achieve. She refused to be a mere pawn in the games of powerful men. Yet that was precisely the role she was about to assume. Despite the crushing weight of the world, a spark ignited within her, a spark she was reluctant to acknowledge. A faint glimmer of curiosity flickered. Could she truly go through with this? Could she, the daughter of a once proud lineage, genuinely embrace the role of a wife to a man like Dernelia? A man whose customs and ways were as alien to her as the desert itself. Her breath caught as a memory resurfaced. She had been younger then, just a girl, but she recalled the scar on her wrist, concealed beneath her dress sleeve. It was a mark she had never revealed to anyone, a forbidden secret, a fragment of her past that connected her to a different world, a different life. What was the cost of peace? Was she willing to sacrifice herself, her future, her very essence for its sake? And if she did, what kind of woman would she become? The distant sound of hooves interrupted her thoughts. She whipped around, her heart leaping as she spotted the silhouette of a rider approaching. It was him, River Moore. As he neared, she could make out his features, the sharp lines of his face, the deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through her. For the first time, Elowen understood that the peril was not just a future threat. It was present, immediate. It was the unspoken vow of the life she was about to enter, and that was merely the start. Elowen stood in the shadow of the wooden fort, her body tense with anxiety, as the sun descended, casting a crimson glow over the landscape. The air was heavy with the smell of burning wood, a distant fire from the village that was barely more than a wisp of smoke on the horizon. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the town behind her, soldiers in the distance, readying for the worst. There was a palpable tension in the air, an unspoken sense that the calm before the storm had lingered too long. And now something was approaching. Her hands shook as she pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She had braced herself for many things: the marriage to River Moore, the political intrigue, the whispers of betrayal. But what she had not anticipated was this, the waiting, the endless anticipation that loomed over her like a predator stalking its prey. Abruptly, the silence was shattered. A shout echoed across the open plains, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. Her heart pounded, and she whirled around, her gaze sweeping the horizon. Through the mist, a small group of riders emerged, galloping swiftly toward the fort. Initially, she assumed they were just settlers returning from a neighboring town, possibly oblivious to the mounting tensions. But as they drew closer, Elowen's stomach churned. These were not settlers. These were Comanche warriors. A wave of panic surged through her. She had seen enough to understand that their arrival could only signify one thing. The storm had arrived prematurely, and it was far from a peaceful entrance. She could discern the war paint on their faces, the intense, unyielding expression in their eyes. The lead rider, tall, muscular, and formidable, fixed his gaze on her, and for a moment, Amelia's breath hitched. Dernelia. He had come. But for what purpose? Was he here for her, or was this a new wave of hostility? Before she could respond, the warriors encircled her, cutting off any chance of escape. Her heart raced, her mind scrambling to comprehend the chaos. She had prepared for many scenarios, but not this. Not the brutality she had read about in tales, not the abruptness of it. "Elowen Devo," a deep voice rumbled behind her. She stiffened. It was Dernelia, his presence casting a shadow over her. His words were not a question, but a command. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was something in his stare, something ominous, something that sent a chill through her veins. He was no longer the distant figure from the stories. He was here now. And whatever was unfolding, it was far from what she had anticipated. "You know why I am here," he said, his voice low and resolute. "This marriage, this union, it must occur now." Elowen's heart pounded heavily in her chest. This was it, the moment that would alter everything. She had known it was inevitable, But the reality of it, the weight of it, was overwhelming. She had not expected it to feel this urgent, this inescapable. But before she could utter a word, a shout echoed, "Durnalia!" A young man on horseback charged toward them, his eyes blazing with fury. He was barely out of his teens, but his face was a mask of determination. Behind him another warrior appeared, an older man, his face etched with age and wisdom, his eyes sharp and calculating. Elowen recognized him instantly. It was Ironhold Thorn, the leader of the rival Comanche faction that had been in a blood feud with Rivermore's people for years. Rivermore's expression darkened as Ironhold Thorn approached, his horse slowing to a trot. "You dare to come to my land to claim what is mine." Thorn's voice was like gravel, thick with contempt. "You believe you can just take her? Take everything?" Elowen's breath caught in her throat. She realized too late what this was, what was transpiring. This was no longer just a political marriage. This was a battle for power, a conflict between two men, two tribes, and her caught in the crossfire. 502. Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from cloud-flared 502 Bad Gateway, unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from cloud-flared. She couldn't let her guard down, not with him or anyone else. As they rode past the initial tents of the camp, the hum of conversations grew more distinct. A few men stood near a fire, their faces hidden by shadows, but their eyes were alert and watchful. Elowen couldn't ignore how they stared at her, as if she were a trophy, something to be contested. Durnalia directed his horse to the heart of the camp, and some of his men began to dismount, setting up for the night. Elowen trailed behind, her thoughts whirling. She had no clue what lay ahead, but she was certain it wouldn't be pleasant. There was an air of finality, as if this was the end of her journey. She would either accept her destiny or resist and face the consequences. They didn't grant her much time to ponder. "Rest," Durnalia commanded, his voice as cold as he gestured towards a blanket spread on the ground. "We depart at first light." Elowen wanted to protest, to demand explanations, but she saw it in his eyes. He had no interest in her thoughts. She was a mere piece in his game, another captive to be silenced until her purpose was served. That night, the desert was unnaturally still. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional flutter of a tent flap in the breeze. Elowen lay on the coarse blanket, gazing at the stars above, attempting to quiet her racing mind. The journey had led her far from everything familiar. Now, she had to endure in a world where the rules were different, where survival meant yielding to the stronger. But Elowen wasn't like the others. She wouldn't just yield. She couldn't. She harbored secrets of her own, things that could alter the power dynamics if ever exposed. As she lay there, trying to suppress the feeling of entrapment, she spotted a figure approaching. Her heart pounded, her instincts urging her to stay alert. It was Zion. "Interested in the truth behind this journey?" he murmured, leaning in so only she could hear. Elowen's heart skipped. The truth? What did he mean? Was this the moment of revelation, or just another trick, another thread in the web of deceit surrounding her? "What truth?" she inquired warily, her voice a mere whisper. He paused, his expression indecipherable in the faint light. "You believe you're here for a political union, but there's more to it. Durnhelia's people are at war with Thorn's tribe, but there's a third party, unknown to both sides. And you? You're more crucial to this conflict than you realize." Elowen felt her breath hitch. She had suspected something more, something deeper, but she hadn't dared to hope. "What does that mean?" she asked urgently, her voice almost inaudible. Zion's eyes were shadowed, unreadable, but his lips curled into a faint, almost bitter smile. The truth is often hidden beneath the surface. Before she could utter a word, he vanished into the darkness, leaving her alone with her whirling thoughts and the growing fear in her heart. The situation had just become far more serious, and Elowen felt a heavy weight in her stomach as she realized she was entangled in something much bigger than she had ever anticipated. There was no going back now. The adventure was only just starting. 2:39 p.m. April 3rd, 2025, Lunara Khalid, the desert sun, was relentless the following morning. Its heat was almost intolerable. Elowen sat quietly, weary but awake. Zion's hushed words echoed in her mind. "You hold more significance than you realize." What did he imply? She was no fighter, merely a woman caught in a conflict she couldn't comprehend. The people of Rivermore and Thorn's clan were at war, and her union with Dernhelm was supposed to be a gesture of peace. But Zion's caution suggested something more profound. As the camp began to stir, Elowen observed Dernhelm engaged in a heated conversation with his warriors. Then his icy voice echoed, "We depart at once." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. They rode for hours until the desert transitioned into a concealed valley, verdant and vibrant. But awaiting them were 2:40 p.m., April 3rd, 2025, Lunara, Khalid. The valley descended into pandemonium. Horses reared up, arrows soared, and metal clashed. The serene oasis had transformed into a war zone in an instant. Elowen barely processed the warning before the ambush commenced. Dernhelm's men scrambled, but the assault was too calculated, too overwhelming. Amid the turmoil, her eyes locked with Zion's, fierce and inscrutable. "Elowen, stay behind me," he bellowed, slicing through foes with ruthless accuracy. But she ignored him. Seizing a spear, she fought, inexperienced yet driven by the will to survive. Then agony. An arrow pierced her side, sending her crashing to the ground. Blood stained her clothes as her vision blurred. Sablewind's frantic voice reached her, his hands hovering over her injury. "Hold on," he begged, but she saw the truth in his eyes. 2:40 p.m., April 3rd, 2025. Lunara Khalid. With a shaky hand, she grasped his arm. "Rivermore, he's not who he claims." A hand yanked her up, cold metal at her throat. "You're a burden." The assailant sneered. Sablewind lunged. Elowen kicked, dislodging the dagger. In a flash, Sablewind subdued the attacker. But the battle was far from over. Dernhelm stood watching, expressionless. Then his voice boomed. "End it." But before the fatal strike, the earth trembled. A new force had arrived. Rivermore's men hesitated. "Retreat!" he commanded. But it was too late. The reinforcements charged in. Sablewind dragged Elowen to safety. But then she saw it. Sablewind bloodied, fighting alongside the assailants. Betrayal. Her breath caught in her throat. Sablewind had never been her ally. He was the enemy. The decisive showdown was imminent. But who would meet their end? The answer was as elusive as the desert winds. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the battlefield in a bloody hue. Smoke and death filled the air. The once serene oasis, now a burial ground for fallen heroes. The earth shook with the collision of blades and the pounding of hooves. Elowen, bruised and bleeding, struggled to keep up with the pandemonium. Yet nothing pained her more than Zion's treachery. The man she had trusted, the man she had fought alongside, had turned into her adversary. Amidst the devastation, she caught sight of him, his sword dripping with blood, his eyes fixed on hers. A fleeting emotion crossed his face. Whether it was remorse or agony, it made no difference. She lurched forward, her ribs throbbing where the arrow had pierced her, but she refused to yield. Sablewind raised his sword, the waning light reflecting off the blade. "Elowen," he called out, his voice low, almost sorrowful. "It's too late. It's finished." "No," she retorted. "You made it this far." With a burst of strength, she lunged. The clash of metal echoed through the valley. The force of his counterattack nearly sent her reeling. He was stronger, quicker, but she possessed something he lacked. The determination to endure. Metal clashed against metal, each strike more frantic than the last. Then, for the briefest instant, uncertainty flickered in Sablewind's eyes. "You don't have to do this," she implored. "This isn't you." His grip tightened. "I'm sorry." The battle reached its zenith. Elowen, breathless and in agony, saw her opportunity. She sidestepped, her spear grazing his arm. Blood splattered the ground. But Kaelin didn't falter. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she struggled. But Sablewind seized her arm, wrenching it violently. Agony shot through her. She gasped but refused to give in. With a final, desperate maneuver, she drove her elbow into his chest. He reeled. She didn't hesitate. The spear found its target, plunging deep into his side. Sablewind gasped, crumpling as his sword clattered to the ground. His wide eyes met hers, filled with an emotion she couldn't identify. Then silence. Elowen stood over him, panting, her body trembling. The battle continued around her, but in that moment she grasped the true price of war. The fight was over. But the war had just begun. The battlefield lay still, the echoes of war fading into the twilight. Elowen stood amidst the ruins, battered and bloodied, her breath ragged. At her feet, Sablewind's lifeless body lay motionless, his face etched with sorrow. She had triumphed. But at what price? Aaliyah approached, her gaze steady, offering no condemnation. "You did what was necessary," she whispered. Elowen couldn't respond. Grief, relief, and guilt battled within her. They turned from the remnants of the battle, stepping into an uncertain future. At camp, the injured and exhausted remained, but so did hope. Her people had endured. Yet one question plagued her. Had Sablewind truly been a traitor or a pawn in a greater scheme? The truth was hidden, but not forever. As the sun sank below the horizon, a shadow moved in the distance. Someone was watching. The war was far from concluded. If this story touched you, give it a like and tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.